I was actually born in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. My parents came in 1920 as immigrants from Calabria and in the mountains of Calabria. They had never gone to school. They came to find a better life. My father had just married my mother, and they were 20 years old. And they had some friends, and my grandfather had come many years earlier, and so they came to the Pittsburgh area, where he worked in the steel mills. But my mother was always very ill, and the doctors said that she had to be taken to a warm weather. So at age 10, we did almost kind of like Grapes of Wrath, you know. Got into our car and with whatever belongings we could muster, and drove across to the New World. And I followed every trail on the map, you know, and when I got to Los Angeles, I just couldn't believe it. It was so pristine, so beautifully, you know. I mean, it was another world, and I loved it. And that's where I grew up. It was very interesting because I was the youngest of four, and none of my siblings had any real interest in music. But I began listening to the Met broadcast. I remember, you know, when I was 6, 7 years old, I'd listened first to the fairy tales that was like, there were Let's Pretend, there were several things on Saturday morning, and then it would be followed by the Metropolitan Opera. I saw my first opera when we moved, living in Los Angeles. I think I was in about the 7th grade, and the San Francisco Opera used to come to Los Angeles 1 week every year, and they used to do a student performance. And so students from the whole system, Los Angeles system, would come, and at the Shrine Auditorium. And my first opera, I still remember it, was Il Trovatore. And I remember there was a soprano. Her name was Sarah Manx, who I looked up later to find out. I think she was from South America. And I believe the tenor, now I've forgotten, but they were very, very well-known singers. And then my second opera, again on a school outing, was Carmen, and with Raoul Jaubin singing Carmen. And it's as if that was all I wanted to see. Well, my real dream is I wanted music so badly. I wanted to study piano. And my mother would finally, we had a little old piano that my older sisters had found, and it was in the garage because it was such a clunker. And but my mother would clean houses so that she could earn enough money for me to have piano lessons. And my dream in those early years was to be a concert pianist. That was really what I loved, and I would listen to, you know, Chopin and Liszt and all of that. Then I went to UCLA. I went there to study with Guy Mayer, and who was really a great piano pedagogue. And when I was studying there, I began joining the opera workshop with Jan Popper, who was a great conductor and pianist, and he urged me to just, you know, be part of the workshop and be the pianist and so forth, and that opened up a whole new world. I was just enthralled, and I found studying to be a pianist a very lonely kind of a thing. You know, those little cubicles where we have to go practice for 3 hours or whatever we could get in there. Then I also found that I decided I wasn't going to be good enough. I remember engineering students who used to come and practice, and they played as well as I did, and I thought, no, I'm not going to make much of myself. So it was really about opera that I said, you know, I love this because it's a combined art. I loved the bringing together of everybody. It was so socially exciting, you know. So then I decided that I wanted to do a PhD. I'd finished a master's in composition. I'd studied with Lucas Foss, and so I thought, now I need a PhD, because I didn't know what I could do to make a living, so I thought I'd better be a professor. So I wanted to do a dissertation on Italian opera. And I kept thinking, at that time, if you did anything, any dissertation, anything after the 18th century, it was not considered very important. You know, Middle Ages, Renaissance. So I kind of pushed the envelope. I said, no, I have to do 18th century opera. Not many people know much about opera seria. So I applied for a Fulbright to go to Naples, which of course was the center of the 18th century opera seria, where all the singers and everybody were trained, and the composers, etc. And so I went there on this Fulbright and studied the scores in the Biblioteca of San Pietro a Maiella. And I thought I was going to die of dust. I mean, these scores were, nobody was looking at them. And, but I learned a lot about opera seria, and it was a fascinating period in the evolution of opera. But then I came back, and of course, I didn't think I could make a living on knowing about opera seria, so I decided I better look for a university position. And I got a call one day from the chancellor of a university called Oakland University. And he said, oh, I understand that you're one of the youngest scholars to be published in musicological studies. I had done some work on some of the encyclopedias, like Musikgeschichte und Gegenwart, and the Italian, on some of the 18th century composers. And I said, well, that's perhaps true. I said, but he said, well, you know, we're just launching a new university here, and we'd like somebody to come out and help us develop it. And I said, well, Mr. Varner, where is Oakland University? And he said, well, it's in Rochester, Michigan. And I said, Rochester, Michigan? He said, yeah, it's outside of Detroit. And I said, well, you know, I always thought I would continue my career on either the East or the West Coast. It was kind of an arrogant thing for somebody to say, you know, but never thought about the Midwest. And he said, well, just come out, you know, and see us. So I got out there in April with California clothes, and here is this university out in these hills, beautiful hills, and it was freezing. It was just freezing, and it was April, you know, with two very insignificant buildings, etc., you know. But Varner said, you know, this is the place where you can make things happen if you believe in them. Hadn't really thought of what that meant, but I had been offered a job at UC Berkeley to just teach 18th century opera. And I thought, what do I want? Do I want to just teach a course about one period and write articles, or do I want to go somewhere where I can create on a blank wall, you know? And so I took that, and that was the beginning of my, you know, sojourn with Michigan and Detroit. Well, I loved composing, and working at UCLA, you know, with Lucas and a number of other things. Roy Harris was there for a while, etc. But I felt every time I brought music into a class that it was always looked at like, you know, well, maybe this chord could be this way, or maybe that, because music, composing, was an academic activity in the 60s and 50s. It was truly ruled by the academic community. And that community thought that contemporary music was all about being either atonal or serial, nothing that looked or felt like, romantic or music. And so at some point I've kind of felt that I didn't belong, that if I was composing, I'd do it for myself. And I did a lot of that. I did a good deal of, chamber music, and when I was at the university, we did concerts of some of my music. But I never felt relevant in terms of what was happening in new music. And actually, it was not until decades later, after being very active in the operatic world and, and some of the programs that we developed, that created an atmosphere where everything could go in the world of opera as well as other music, is when I really felt that I could feel free to write the way I wanted to. Los Angeles was a very interesting kind of a, we never thought of ourselves as being very cultured as a city, because there was always San Francisco, and we tended to have an inferiority complex about LA. We didn't have an opera company there, and the symphony, we didn't have a great hall and so forth, and people looked at Los Angeles as an extension of a movie colony, and the true culture was up in San Francisco. But there was a lot of talent there. Lotfi was one of my colleagues. We went to school together. We always agreed, though, that he was more advanced than I was. He was a graduate student, and I was an undergraduate. But we became great friends. And I remember Marilyn Horne, and she was in the Roger Wagner chorale, et cetera, and there were some wonderful singers, Marilyn Niska, et cetera, that were there working with Jan Popper, and also at USC. There were very important schools there that had very rich musical activities. I mean, Schoenberg, and of course, and Stravinsky, and all of those people, left a really important kind of legacy and gave a certain excitement to what was happening, even though we didn't have the institutions as other cities did. Of course, those evolved later on. But Los Angeles was a wonderful kind of place for me to grow and to follow, my passion. Well, here I was at Oakland University developing a school of music, and we got involved in developing the Meadowbrook Festival and the Meadowbrook Theater. There was a lot there, but there was no opera. But the Metropolitan Opera came once a year. And of course, that was the social event of the season. And, they would squeeze 8 operas into a week. And, you just kind of OD'd on opera, but that's all there was. But there were several people who were volunteers who felt that we needed to expand into the community. And so we created an educational outreach program called Overture to Opera. And what I was asked to do was to look at the season, the operas that came, and I would choose an evening of scenes from probably 4 of the operas, produce them in English, tour them in community centers and in schools, matinees, and we became a kind of a introduction to opera, and with audiences that didn't go to the Met. We hoped that they would, but usually that one week sold out anyhow, because a lot of the opera lovers would just buy tickets for as many of those operas as they could, And so as I created that program and we gained more and more friends in the different communities, I began to feel that this was the beginning of, this was the foundation of what should be our own opera company. because an opera company should not just be doing opera. It should be part of a community. It should be reaching out. It should be active on many levels. The Overture Opera started in 1962, first year that I came actually to the Detroit area. And so it went for almost a decade. But I began cheating about what was in the program. Instead of doing scenes from the operas that the Met did, I would start doing one-act operas and then do 2 scenes from Met operas. I did operas like Der Jahrsager of Kurt Weill, or The Portuguese Inn of Cherubini, or Rita of Donizetti. So I wanted people to get a sense that we could do more than a scene, and that we could produce it. And then we did our very first opera in 1970 at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and Maria Ewing made her professional debut in that production. And Italo Tayo, who was one of my dear friends and so, wanting to help and encourage me, came and directed. And that was our first. And then I brought a group of people together, including the mayor's wife, etc., and saying, look, this is time for us to have our own opera company. We can do it. This will be a major cultural resource for our community. So then we found a theater, the music hall, that had been pretty much abandoned because, as you know, the riots were in 1967, and there was a tremendous amount of movement in the community. But it was a wonderful theater. Through the help of a lot of people, particularly the Townsends, he was chairman of Chrysler at the time, and they were great volunteers, and we just cleaned up the theater and started producing opera there. And I was there for 14 years before we outgrew it as a house. It's a beautiful house, and
does it still exist?
It still exists, and it's very active with a lot of other programming. I couldn't do what has been done in some cities, like when I went to California when they asked me to help develop Opera Pacific, where they come and said, let's build an opera company. I didn't feel that was going to be possible here. I felt as if we had to do it incrementally, and then they could see that it was possible. I always felt that one of the big challenges that Detroit had, and it was a great city and still has the capacity to be a great city, is that because it was so focused on its blue-collar workers, etc., that they had a kind of a sense of what they couldn't do instead of what they could do. And so you couldn't just say, we're gonna start an opera company, it's gonna take this, it's gonna take that, and so forth, and they'd look at you and think you were really out of your mind. But if you began doing things and started growing it and building friends for it, etc., and then they go, oh, yeah, I guess that's possible. And that had to be the strategy of bringing an opera company to the city. I felt there was a tremendous amount of controversy among our board members and so forth. Well, this is Detroit, it should be Detroit. And I said, but this is a company that should service the state. We should not just limit ourselves, just like the Minnesota Symphony, etc. So I really wanted to have a name that gave us the reflection that we could serve, and we did a lot of touring, particularly during the times when the Arts Council, the Michigan Council, was significantly supporting the arts. That, of course, because of economy, has declined almost to nothing, but we went to all the cities, Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula, East, West, did residencies, week-long residencies. David DiChiera was very much in the forefront of developing the educational projects that went with those programs. Matter of fact, she sensitized me a lot to the fact that education was just as important as to the artistic quality of what you put on stage. And those things had to come together, and that one enhances the other. It's not only our future in terms of audience, but it also gives us a way of bringing people even closer to an art form. And as you know, in Opera America, that's been such a tremendous part of, I think, of the, of what is done there. I think it was my work. I trained on the job in terms of being a general director. It was just all about trying to be practical and understanding. The one thing I've never forgotten, I remember I was always in awe of Rudolph Bing, and this incredible figure and what the Metropolitan stood for. But I remember him saying, every financial decision has an artistic ramification, and every artistic decision has a financial one. And I knew that from the beginning. And I had seen and known that many people in the arts often thought only about the artistic and saying, this is what we must do, and they were dreaming through. And then they'd leave the finances behind and for people to pick up after them, And I felt that was not going to happen. That couldn't happen. I wouldn't last. That people had to know that you were prepared to understand and to have the resources for whatever, you were going to do. So, I sometimes envy those who had that. And of course, there are the programs now in universities, management programs, etc. But on the other hand, I think that I learned a lot. I worked with a lot of people. Robert Huer was my first person that I hired as we grew enough to have a managing director. And I'm very proud of the people who, as I grew older, I began to think of myself a little bit like Kurt Herbert Adler. At some point or another, everybody has worked with me. Makes you feel very ancient. Oh, I learned a lot from the mistakes, a tremendous amount of things that sometimes you just did not think something through. And I think what made me feel okay so that I didn't beat myself up so much was to say this was important. This was something to remember and to hold in your mind as you went on to do something else. Always was. As a matter of fact, when because I had been president of Opera America, which now I know would be chairman, I guess, I had been asked I'd go to different places, and it was through that I was asked to come to Orange County because they had just built a beautiful performing arts center and that they wanted an opera company. And I went there, and of course, it's such a wonderful place and such capacity and such potential. But I said to them I couldn't leave Michigan Opera Theater, that it was too important to me and it was too important to the community. So after, I think it was about a decade of going back and forth, I knew that because both companies were growing a great deal, they were both within the largest 12 companies, as I remember, that I couldn't continue to do this, that I would have to make a choice. And when I said to the board there, I said, I really do think I have to go back to Detroit. I said, because, I said, first of all, Orange County is such a wonderful area. It has a lot of potential. It doesn't have the problems that our urban city has. And I said, I need to continue, and I need to create an opera house in Detroit, because that is going to help revitalize the city. I said, that for me is more important. I said, I think I could produce opera anywhere, but I'm not sure I could make as big a difference in an area that doesn't need that difference. And I said, Detroit does. And I think that what we can do with an opera company and an opera house can help become a catalyst. And that for me has always been important. It's been important not only in the revitalization of the city, but in building bridges into every part of the community and making sure that an art form like opera can speak to everybody and that they can feel that they have a part of it. Because what is opera? It's drama and music, and all peoples have drama and music. And so it's as simple as that. And so that is what's kept me in this city, which I love, because I feel that it has great potential, it has wonderful cultural institutions, and that we all need to be part of its new revitalization. Well, first of all, when I left the music hall, because it was too small, and I felt the company moving into things where we could have opera on a larger scale, you know, international artists, etc. The other theaters that were here, and we used them for about another 10 years, the Fisher, which was a Broadway house, and the Masonic, again, another large house, but not really meant for opera, all of them had shortcomings when it came to what an opera house and opera company should be, not only in terms of audience amenities, but in terms of what was, I always consider an opera house like a factory, an opera factory. And so it should have not only a major stage and wing space, but dressing rooms and areas for makeup and you know, and just a whole backstage structure. And so I knew that was never going to happen unless we created it, but we were never going to be able to build an opera house here. There was just not the resources for that. And when this theater, which had been abandoned, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, was there, you know, I came and looked at it, and at one point, I brought Luciano Pavarotti here. And I was embarrassed because, first of all, you couldn't even step on the stage. It was, you would have fallen through. But we stood on the side, and I said, Luciano, this is going to be an opera house. I said, you know, the architect, whose name was C. Howard Crane and did most of the movie palaces here, did some of them in Thailand and all that, but he created this one in what he called the opera house style. There was something prophetic about that, you know. It had a wonderful kind of shape, and so he sang, you know, part of, I think it was Recondita Armonia or whatever. And he said, yes, he said, I think so. And he said, you know, you finish this and I will come, and I will help you inaugurate it. And this was in 1990 or 91, I don't remember, but it took us nearly 6 years to raise money and to get it into what I called operable. It wasn't finished. It was owned by actually some company in Baltimore or something that treated it as just, you know, something that they would hold on to. And so we purchased this theater. I tried to buy as much stuff around as possible. And it took us 6 years. And Luciano...
You didn't just clean
Oh my God, no. It was in such terrible shape. I mean, about 70% of the plaster work because it had a flat roof, and so water kept collecting and falling through. So most of that all just kept falling. And the stage was unusable. So we tore down the stage all the way to the proscenium. bought a building that was behind us and created what I had hoped would be a very, very ample stage. And as a matter of fact, the depth of the stage is deeper than the depth of the auditorium floor. April 20th, I believe, 96, and because Luciano had promised to come, we decided we'd be ready, and a group of wonderful artists joined him. It was really one of the most exciting nights I think, for this city. There were just such great pride and such incredible, so many people who didn't think it could happen. And I think it did a great deal for a lot of the community to say, you know, these are the things that we can do here. And that's what I think so many of us that are dedicated to rebuilding this city are saying. There's nothing that's not possible. I mean, we're the gateway to Canada, and we have wonderful buildings and tremendous know-how. And so I think when Detroit is finished remaking itself, I think that it will be a model for a lot of the urban centers that go through what we're going. We're probably in the forefront of having gone through it. But, you know, we're dealing with with the Industrial Revolution, the kind of what's happening, the social revolution. All of those things have to be looked at, faced, and made into opportunities. I think in a big way, right? I mean, within several years, we began having restaurants. And then on the other side of me, I had never planned on it, but first of all, the Tigers decided to come. So we have Comerica Park right across the street, and then one block down, we have the Lions. We're great on animals here. So we have the Tigers and the Lions. So two major stadiums. Then the new YMCA right across. It challenged us because I found myself unable to accommodate our patrons when it came to parking. When you have an 80,000 and a 45,000 seat arenas who are sometimes playing at the same time, parking became almost non-existent. So we had to do what I had never thought I would do, and that is to build a major parking center. Which has its challenges for us. But that was all part of what happened once this opera house opens. This is now what we call an entertainment district, and there's a number of theaters here, and as I said, galleries, etc. So it did play a role of which I'm very proud.
Can you watch a baseball game from your
office?
I
do, from my office. I do. I get up when I hear them cheering, then I know we made a home run. And I go out and look out and say, oh yeah, there it is. That was, first of all, I resisted that. I had originally, my friend Bernard Uzon, who's both an actor and was the general director of the Montreal Opera, had heard some of my music and came to me one day while he was directing saying, David, I've heard your music. And he said, I've always wanted to see Cyrano made into an opera. Of course, it's been made into an opera, but at that time, it had been languishing for 100 years. And I said, well, I'd never thought about that. And he said, well, let me take you through it. And of course, I'd always decided that if I wrote an opera, it had to be an opera that had a very romantic, that really tugged at me emotionally. And Bernard brought me through it one day, and I ended up, in tears. And I said, well, I guess I have to do this. And he said, well, I'm going to commission you to do this for Montreal. And so I began to work on it, at which point, about a year as I was into it, Montreal and Bernard parted ways. So I thought, well, now what do we do? And I said, well, I said to Bernard, I said, let's just finish it, you know. And I said, we'll let it find its own way. At which point, I had introduced several of my colleagues to the work, and I remember Bob Hewer, we did a little thing of it in New York, and he heard it, and he seemed very taken with it. And I thought we needed another partner. And when we did Margaret Garner in Cincinnati, Bob was there, and I said, Bob, I want to play you some of my music. So he said, well, he has a little home in Indiana. So I made my way there, and with a tape, because we had done a workshop in Orange County. And he opens the door and he said, you know, I don't have anything to play that on. And he said, I have an old piano in the living room. And I thought, oh my God, you know. So I go in there and I start trying to, you know, to be everything. These days I don't play that well. I certainly don't sing or anything, so I did whatever I could. And he stops me in about 10 minutes and he says, David, why have you wasted your life running opera companies? And I said, Bob, I didn't think I had wasted it. And he said, well, this is beautiful. He said, I certainly want to do it. Well, so that was fine. We had 2 other opera companies. But in the meantime, this board had discovered that I had written an opera. I'd always kept it secret. And they were they weren't unhappy, they were disappointed. You mean you're going to not premiere this opera here? Because I thought I'd do it elsewhere. I didn't want to be publishing my own work, you know. So that became an interesting thing, and I know my board chairman was very saying, you know, you've got to do it here. And I said, well, let me talk to my colleagues and see. I said, maybe the fact that it is going to go elsewhere. I said, if it was only going to be done here, I wouldn't do it. We would just never do it. I can't do that. And so they seemed very comfortable with that. And so we did do that. It was kind of like a, what should we say, a kind of a culmination of my life here. And I thought the city was going to just not stop. And I know you were here. And it was very moving.
That was amazing.
You know, that...
I assume that's what the Milan audience was like when Verdi was in the hall.
I suppose. Like I'd never put myself in that position, but it was very special. I had always wanted to commission an opera for the opening, but that was 96. There was no way. I mean, the finances of just getting the opera house opened was so challenging. I thought, we just have to wait for that. Then I always felt the new opera, the first opera that we do in this opera house, should really reflect the city in a very special way. And it shouldn't just be an opera about anything. It needs to be an opera that honors and pays tribute to the African American community. That's the community that is the major population of our city. And I said, I want them to know that opera, and that we could create a new opera that is something that can give them a sense of pride. And it was an interesting process, because when I talked to some of the African American leaders in our community, because at that time Denise Graves had come to me and said, you know, Richard Danielpour is working on an opera about, you know, a slave, and this very famous story that was also had been written about. And I said, you know, that's exactly what I've been looking for. And if Toni Morrison would do this, I said, I think that would be so exciting. But then when I approached some of the people in the African American community, they said, I don't know that we want to have another something about slavery. And I said, well, let me bring Richard here. He's so passionate about this work. And so I brought together about 30 community leaders including some very important African American community leaders, and we talked about this. And by the time that session was over, there was tremendous excitement about it, and so I felt good about it, that I could do something that would not only create a work that could be very special and that might have some resonance. I remember Betty Brooks, who you all know, getting up and saying, you know, I've seen operas about the Israelites and their plight, and now, you know, that's seen all over the world. Why shouldn't our history and our plight be celebrated by an art form like opera, you know? And I think that played a great part in everybody saying, yeah, that's true, you know. And then I had the assignment of, once we decided that, I needed some partners. And I thought about Cincinnati because, as you remember, they had some problems in Cincinnati.
And the story itself takes place right across the river.
Right there. So when I talked to them, at first there was some real hesitation, you know. But then I put them in touch with some really incredible leaders in Detroit. Arthur Johnson, who was one of the major people in the movement for civil rights, and Damon Keith, et cetera. And these are icons of that. And they really then began to feel that this could be as important for them as it was for Detroit. Bob Driver understood it right away, and so we had three, I thought, really wonderful cities in which this opera could have an important resonance. And then I was so excited when it had a new production in New York, because I felt now that the opera really is going to find its way, and 50 years from now in some city where, you know, it could be Paris or whatever, you know, the incredible history and the drama of the life of in our country of blacks is going to move people, and that's what opera does. I think it's because I believe in it so passionately, and I think the people in the community, the various, hasn't only been the African Americans, but I did that with like Armenian community. I did Anush twice, opera, their national opera, which had never been done in North America. I did that with Polish community, doing operas that they had never seen, had never been done here, because I wanted people to be able to realize that opera expresses their world, their history, their music as well. And this for me is as important as putting Bohème on stage, because I think that opera is such a tremendous way of speaking to people. I remember when Sister Helen was here, when I did Dead Man Walking, and she said to me, you know, I was excited when the movie was made, and when Lotfi called about, let's make an opera out of this, she said, I didn't know anything about opera, but if you think so, you know. And then she said, when I saw it, I realized that only opera was able to dig deep into our emotions and to bring us to feelings of what people are feeling. And that was so exciting to me, because that's what we need to look at. That's what we can do with people of every, you know, from every economic, you know, no matter who they are. Our big challenge is exposure. Our big challenge is reaching them. Our big challenge is the economics of doing it. You know, if only the stimulus allowed us, you know, some money to really just let the arts go into every community, you know. that would be a huge difference for all of us. Oh, I love her.
How do you and she have such a relationship?
Oh,
She
we
loves
go
you.
back. We go back. When I was at music hall, and the first, I had done everything opera in English because I was trying to be different than that big week of the Met, you know, where everybody thought that was what opera needed to be. But I felt that maybe we should do an opera in the original language. And so I knew Willie Waters. He had worked with me before. And I said, I want to do Trovatore. And I said, and I don't know Martina, I said, but I would love to have her come and do it. And through Willie, I got to meet her. And it was like a mutual love affair. I mean, she was part of our house, and she'd come, and I brought her to Meadowbrook. She did concerts there. She came back here and did a number of things. But I loved her outlook on life, her ability to be so real. I mean, you know, she could have been a diva of all times, you know, and she was nothing like that. I mean, and so, you know, my children loved her. We just have that kind of a feeling, and I was so proud that she even took the time. She came here, to see Cyrano. I've invited her to do things, and Martina is she's a diva who's not a diva. I was kind of a lonely child. I didn't play a lot outside with other kids. I don't know. I felt that they were always more capable than I was. But what I used to love to do, I used to get movie magazines, and I would cut out the kind of the playbill, you know, that says, you know, Gone with the Wind, you know, or whatever it was starring. And I'd cut those out, and then I made a kind of a pretend movie theater. And so then I'd paste up what was playing, whether it was, you know. And so then I had a pair of dice, and I would say, okay, I wonder how many people are going to come to see this movie. And I would roll the dice, and if it said 10, I would say, oh, 10 people, that's okay. So years after, I thought, and I don't enjoy looking at box office things, but I ask for them every day, you know, and so forth. I thought, I've never gotten away from this, have I? You know, so it was a kind of a strange throwback to childhood days.
And in fact, every repertoire selection is like rolling the dice.
Rolling the
How
dice.
many will come to this?
I mean, it's like you never know anymore these days, you know. The renovation had a tremendous amount of challenges, but I remember when we had to tear this building down. It was over here somewhere. And of course we had to get the wrecking ball, and there was a lot of people who thought that maybe that was a historic building, and it really wasn't. So we had to kind of say, but what we were going to do. And then there were other people who said, now, are you going to really restore this building, you know? And I said, yes, we're going to restore it, but we're also going to add on to it. We're going to build a new stage house. We have to build a whole elevator tower because, you know, these theaters had no elevators. It amazed me when you think that people had to go all the way up into the balconies and to walk. I mean, there was never any thought about that a theater should have an elevator, you know. And but a lot of the time was trying to find the artists that could restore, that could do the murals that we wanted to make sure that they were in the exact duplications of the original. And I think we found several of them who were actually from Russia, and they were great. They often surprised me with what they did. Sometimes they would say, I hope you like this, and I'd go up and look, and then they would take one of the faces, and I'd realize that they had taken a picture of me and put it in there, you know. And there I was in some kind of robe conducting a group of cupids.
Are you in a mural?
I am in a mural, right. So, but they were all wonderful. And before we did the opening concert, I invited all of the people that had worked on this house just to come and enjoy, you know. There was so much love and passion in creating this house that it kept me going. One of the exciting things for me was when I knew that this house had a tremendous appeal for artists, singers, and dance companies. The ABT people always told me it was one of their favorite houses to come to. But when Pavarotti called me and said, David, I'm going to be doing Aida again at the Met, and I haven't done it there for a good number of years. I will come and do it at the Opera House if you'd like to do it in concert. And I said, of course. And so I made it kind of like the centerpiece of a Verdi festival, because it was the Verdi year, I think it was 2001. And I thought, you know, if he thinks about this house as being one that he can really enjoy acoustically, then I think we've, you know, done something that's good. Oh, it was incredible. I mean, we made a lot of friends. I loved the idea of going into those communities. I didn't know a lot of people in it, but you know, the fundraising that they worked with at some of the, like the Armenian church, and then we had more. I learned more about Armenian food and Armenian culture. I was invited to Yerevan to go there. They were so proud that, and the Archbishop of the Armenian Church came and so forth. And the same with the Polish community. I mean, we have a major Polish community in Detroit, Hamtramck, which is a city within Detroit. It was founded, is a Polish community. I was more successful with Strażny Dwór, which is the haunted castle by Moniuszko, because it was a 19th century work and had a lot that was Polish, mazurkas, etc., you know. Then when I did King Roger of Szymanowski, it was the first time it had been done in America in Polish. And that was a stretch for them. But they were very proud anyhow, you know, that this was a work that was of their culture and of their, you know, by a wonderful Polish composer. But, and I've always looked for, the important thing is to look for leadership in those communities who want to do this and then help you work into that community. And, you know, we would do so many different programs about Armenian culture and about Anush itself. And those were some of the things I really treasured the most, was moving into communities and giving operas to the whole community that reflected communities that did not have an operatic presence in our repertoires. I've so much wanted to commission an opera that would, and I've talked to Richard Danielpour about this, and the interesting thing about Richard, of course, is he straddles both these Persian and Jewish. And I thought, wouldn't it be incredible to commission a work that had a resonance for the you know, for both of those communities in some way that could help bring people together. And I've actually been looking for a literary person, you know, like a Toni Morrison of that world. And our resources are limited these days, but that is, if there's a next world premiere in this city, it will be one that will reflect that community, for which we're very excited to have here. I think we're such a wonderful melting pot of so many communities, a growing Latino community, and so it enriches us, and we have to enrich our repertory.